Okay, hello everyone. In history, there are only very few moments that can be identified as being watershed moments which shape and set into motion a whole new future. And one of those moments is documented in this week's chapter, Torah chapter, the chapter of Yahrzeit, and the event is the story of Sinai. What we call in Jewish thought Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah at Sinai, which happened 35 years ago. And it's documented in detail. And though at the time the Talmud tells us that the entire world was impacted, however, with the years as they rolled on, we saw the impact in a way that's undeniable. That today, I just did the math, 57% of the population of the world, almost 60% of the population, 2.3 billion Christians and 1.6 billion Muslims all see this event as the beginning of their history as well, their religious history. So it's quite amazing that an event where I don't know how many Jews were standing at Mount Sinai at the time, we don't know the exact numbers, but an event that's been documented and been honored and celebrated by Jews for so many years, at some point actually took hold that till this very day, you're talking about 60% of the population of the world, close to over 3.5 billion people out of the almost 4 billion people out of 7 billion people are see the Bible and the Torah at Sinai as the birth of their faith. I find that to be pretty amazing, because when you look in the Talmud says that when the Jews stood at Mount Sinai, there was the event permeated and affected the entire earth. The Talmud describes it in poetic fashion that the birds stopped chirping, the wind stopped blowing, and there was a certain silence, like a shudder, that affected the entire earth. And the nations of the world, the Talmud says, came running to Bilam, the prophet, who was a great prophet, as great almost as Moses. And they asked him, what's happening? What's going on this earth? And he said, Hashem oiz la'ama yitain, Hashem yivarach hasamei v'shalom. That God is giving His power to His nation, to the Jewish people, and which will bring blessing and of peace to the entire earth. This is a documented story in the Talmud that goes back almost 2,000 years. And now, 2,000 years later, or 3,500 years later almost, since Sinai, it actually took place that suddenly you have billions of people who see this event, as I said, as their beginning of their revelation. I'm not getting now into the distinctions and the distortions of different religions. It's not a study of comparative religions here, but cannot deny the fact that this event, which, as I said, for the Jewish people was always a central event, have such an impact literally on billions and billions of people. I say it not just to pull rank and to pat ourselves in the back, but when things have such impact, even Facebook is only 1.1 billion, and here we're talking close to 4 billion, so we're still ahead of the game. When some things have such impact, it has to get our attention to think about what it really means on a personal level. So I thought it was appropriate, especially in context, as I mentioned here, that this year is the 200th anniversary of the yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe, which is the founder of Chabad Hasidism. 200 years ago, he passed away in the year 1812. Now in the year 2013, the end of 1812. So Alter Rebbe was a one of a kind person who innovated and introduced a whole revolutionary approach to applying Judaism to contemporary times. So, as we always say, nothing really new, but as they say, the newest things are the things that were never really new, they were just always there, but sometimes are neglected and not seen. Those are the most powerful truths. So I thought it appropriate a week like this to talk about yet another contribution of what exactly is Torah and what is Judaism. Now, we live in a time where there is we call it a Jewish identity crisis. You ask most Jews whether they're traditional, observant, or whatever title they carry, most would not be able to really define what it means to be Jewish. For many, Judaism today is a culture. It's something you grew up with. It's almost like a program. Like everybody grows up in their particular family. So we know that the statistics show that most people are conformists, and conformists follow the culture and they follow the routines and rituals of their homes, unless there's a very strong reason not to. This isn't only true to Jews, it's true to any community. So when a person grows up in an environment like that, it's not necessarily due to some great philosophical choice or some momentous moment that a person came to an epiphany and said, this is the truth. It's a big part of it is where you grew up. So people grew up in certain homes where they were taught Judaism, just maintain it. Others growing up in more assimilated homes, they continue what they grew up with, which may not be very strong commitment. So it's not a surprise that for many people, when you ask the question, so what does it mean to be Jewish? And what does it mean what is the Torah? Many people don't really have an answer. I don't know what each of you would answer. And of course, we all like to show that we're somewhat intelligent, so I'm sure everybody can come up with some intelligent response. But the question is if it's a true resonating response or it's a cute response. I've asked the question to many people in my journeys, and often you hear the answer is that being Jewish, some people say it means being socially responsible. Some people say it means voting Democrat. Some people associate it with bagels and lox, and then with the rituals and the holidays. If you ask someone on a philosophical level, what exactly is Judaism from a philosophical point of view, and then if you're challenged to compare it to other philosophies, most cannot really have an answer. I'm not saying this to be critical, I'm just saying it as an observation, but just it tells us that the word being Jewish itself is quite confusing. What does it mean? Does it mean, some people technically be Jewish is you're born to a Jewish mother, or you convert according to Jewish law, halacha? Is that what Jewish is? So I want to talk about all this because we're talking about this mandate called the Torah, and therefore deserves to really explore something that may be just neglected and never even discussed. And the point here is not just to be theoretical, it's really to look at ourselves as human beings and understand what we are and what we stand for. So when I was a teenager myself and growing up in a traditional Jewish home, went to yeshivas and so on, I asked these questions to myself. In the context of an immature teenager. Now I'm more of an immature adult, I guess. But as an immature teenager, so you have these questions. I had these questions, and I was not really clear. I was not really able to find answers. And I thought to myself, is this some program, as I said, that people just follow? Rituals, routines. I knew many beautiful people in my childhood, and I didn't have any abusive or negative or even dogmatic exposure to Judaism. My home was a very easygoing home, open-minded. My parents were well-educated and well-read, and ideas flowed freely. We were not silenced, so I didn't have the issue of a religion that silences the mind. So I didn't have any negative experiences, but at the same time, I always wondered, what is the basis of all of this? Not so much about whether the truth of it, which is another question, but what does it mean? What does it even mean to be Jewish? To the point that it actually bothered me, and today I'm able to articulate it better than I did then. It bothered me, so what does it mean to be human, and then what does it mean to be Jewish? Is Jewish not being human, or is it a better human? Is it a different type of human? And the word religion began to rub me the wrong way. It continues to rub me the wrong way because it always was religious human being is an adjective. Adjectives, if you know anything about English, is meant to describe something. So I remember when I was in high school and we had our English teacher, Mr. Millendorf, he taught us the power of the adjective. So I remember from the few times that our class was well behaved and we listened a bit, I remember the lesson of the adjective. It still remained. He asked us all to describe any scene, some beautiful scene. So I chose a sunset, and the second scene was a beach. The waves washing up on a beach. And he was asked us to describe it. So, the waves washing up on a beach. That sounds like a good description. The sun setting in the skies. So he taught us the adjective that when you add the word, the red glowing sun, or the bubbly waters washing up on the dry sand, so the word bubbly and dry, red, glowing, these are adjectives that describe a noun. They describe the same thing, but you get it comes alive. It brings alive the experience. So you could say I walked down the street, or you could say I walked down the busy street. And the adjective helps you create a mood that you can convey to someone else. A little trick of the trade in writing. The key is adjectives. Nouns just tell you what it is, but if you want the experience, you need to have the adjective. So I started wondering, what does this tell us? When you say, here's a man, and here's a religious man. Here's a woman, here's a religious woman. What does the word religious mean? It's a good question, right? So some people would say, well, it means ritualistic. It's a person that does rituals. So that really describing the human being, or describe what they're doing? So, it's like, is there such a thing as a carpenter and a religious carpenter? We don't really use those terms. I began to realize that words were really very hollow until you fill them with meaning. As a matter of fact, words actually can be full of stereotypes based on just common use, where no one really gives a thought. Like the blind leading the blind, everyone's just using the same word again and again and again. And when you challenge yourself and you challenge the norm, you challenge the status quo, you come away with obviously deeper insight. So this really can be applied across the board to every word we use. In the context of Jewish context, the word Torah, the word God, the word soul, the word, as I said, religion, mitzvah, Mashiach, the whole list. What do all these words mean? And I submit to you that all these words really mean nothing. If worse than that, they're filled with meanings that people have imposed upon them, and they become part of a culture that we begin to be thoughtless, and it's just like we just use words without really thinking what they're saying. Take God, for example. God. So we live in a world where you have people who are passionate believers. They're so passionate that they're ready to die for the name of God. They're ready to kill others in the name of God. You have people who are passionate non-believers, who are as radical atheists as the radical believers, who froth at the mouth is how much they don't believe. The classic atheist statement, he says, "I hate you, God, so much as if you had existed." That type of passion. And then you have passionate agnostics, and of course you have people who are not so passionate about it all. But this word God, and all the debates about God, whether you read Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens' Olav Shalom, or some of the other contemporary resident atheists today, many of them Jews, for the record, or you have the passionate believers, you come away with, okay, what are they arguing about? First we have to define what the word God means. So there's the classical story with Rabbi Jacobson, who said, when he was once asked, a neighbor of his, a self-proclaimed atheist, said to Rabbi Jacobson, I don't believe in God. And Rabbi Jacobson replied, he said to him calmly, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. Which tells you the whole story. It depends what word you mean. Before you talk about I believe, I don't believe, before we disagree or agree about something, we have to state the terms, the meaning of the word. And you see this in any contract. The first thing you see in a legal contract is terms. Who's who? Because if you don't have the terms, the whole agreement can be useless. So you have to establish who is who. What term means what. And the same thing is in any type of intelligent conversation. Which is why a good class about any topic will begin with terms. Let's define our terms, so that we know we're talking about the same thing, or else you could spend years talking about something and realize you're talking about two different things, even though you're both using the same word. So that's why it's so vital to really interpret Torah, Judaism, God, in a way that we really can relate to it and make sense. So my own exploration, my own research, I began to look for this, and I couldn't find it. There was nowhere that it really says. You never find a verse in the Torah, or a Rashi, or a commentary, or a Medrash, or something that says, here is what God means, here is what the Torah means. It begins, Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. But it doesn't tell us what God is, it just assumes that God created heaven and earth. What is the meaning of the word? And on and on and on. So I submit that the best way to approach this is actually to clean the slate, to get rid of all interpretations, so nothing is haunting us and nothing is distorting or shaping our viewpoint, and just start from scratch. And frankly, it doesn't even matter what word we use. Maybe the word should not be used. God maybe shouldn't be used, because God is so loaded and so fraught with all kinds of myths and stereotypes. It could be just using that word is what is destructive. And I can't resist. I always mention the story that I always tell about early years of this class years and years ago, but it just always captures the story again and again the same way. That the early years of this class, the core people that were attending, were people in the arts and entertainment industry. And I remember realizing and thinking to myself that even before I opened my mouth, I hear people coming with a completely different background, people who did not have any type of traditional Torah education. And I was sitting there coming from my background, and I realized that the commonality between us can often be lost due to language and due to culture and due to appearances. The mere fact I was sitting there with a beard and a yarmulke, I don't know what it's evoking in people's minds, that the invisible stereotype that people don't say. How many things do we think that we don't tell somebody when you meet them? And they can block us from communicating well. It's not a neutral image that my image projected. I may remind one person of an angry grandfather that schlepped him to synagogue. Make sure the sound is working, by the way. Schlepped him to synagogue in Yom Kippur, irrelevant Hebrew school teacher, someone with a very negative experience, or even positive experiences. So I tried an experiment. I decided to do exactly what I just said, to clean the slate. Will not use any preconceived language, meaning any terms that anyone can hook on to, any meaning. So just a new language completely. One that was neutral, and nobody could hook, as I said, could attribute to it any preconceived notions, myths, distortions. So instead of the word God, I used words like the essence, higher reality. If it was a particularly more New Age group, I would say undefined layers of unconscious energy, things like that. Instead of the word Torah, I used the word blueprint. Instead of the word mitzvah, connection. Instead of the word Mashiach, Geula, I used the word destination. And here I was waxing eloquent about reaching the essence of reality, these undefined layers, through making these connections by following a blueprint to the point where we reach a destination of total fusion and integration between the inner and the outer. This was the language I was speaking. And being that it was not loaded with any words that anybody could have a problem with, everybody was really actually mesmerized by the ideas. And I was really smiling inside to myself, and I was getting away with it. After a few weeks, a guy came over to me and said, "Are you talking about God?" So I said, "Yes, but don't spoil it for the others." That's what happened. And I've used this story many, many times. It resonates, anyone hears it. And it worked better than I even expected. Because this is the true art of communication, is not finding the right words. It's actually finding the wrong words, if I could put it that way. It's actually not looking for words, it's looking for heart. If I can identify with you without using words, and you realize, you resonate, and you say what you're hearing is what you're feeling, then we have a connection. And if a word in some way is loaded because it projects some type of image or idea that puts up a wall between us, then there's no communication. So we're always taught, especially in our time and age, to communicate. People can't guess what you're thinking. Tell your spouse what you feel. Break the silence. This is a classic modern psychotherapy, psychology. But at the same time, though words are bridges of communication, it's true, nobody could tell what you're thinking. At the same time, words can also be traps. Because words, I may use a word that to me is innocuous, meaningless, but for you, you go ballistic when you hear it because it's the word your mother used every time she got angry. And how am I to know that? So words can also be filled with feelings and so on. If you heard a word when you were in a traumatic situation, that word is not just a neutral word. It's like sometimes certain tastes we have when we were not in a good place, the taste, physical taste, becomes repulsive. So it's far more complicated than just finding words. It's actually really trying to find a bridge that does not block, that does not impede the flow between two human beings. So when it comes to topic like Torah, Judaism, Sinai, everything I'm discussing here, these are the hardest ideas to really convey in that way, because it's one thing when we say the word love. Even that is also fraught with all kinds of meaning. What does the word love even mean? What love means to you may be very different than what love means to me. We're right there. So, but when it comes to so-called religious terms, and I don't like the word religious, it gets, as I said, far more complicated because millions of people are killed in the name of religion. Religion has many distortions to it and so on. So I'm going to use, even though I already exposed my trade secret here, and I've already showed you that, shown the ability to, I told you what using language and what it means and what it doesn't mean. At the same time, we're talking here among friends, so I want to demonstrate how we can speak about this language, how we can speak about these ideas called Torah and so on in ways that it can be absolutely relevant or absolutely irrelevant. So if someone says to you, okay, what does the word Torah mean? For someone who never heard the word Torah before, it's a meaningless word. It means absolutely nothing. You translate it into English, some say Bible. Okay, Bible. What does the Bible mean? The Bible is a book. It's a book of history. Is it a book of poetry, of inspiration, spirituality, of laws? What is the definition of Bible or Torah? And right there, if you don't really have a quick answer, you immediately are stuck in a place where your definition may work for you, but it won't work for anybody else. And even for you, it may not work. It's just something you're used to. And the same thing as I go back to what I began with the word Jewish, Jew, the word Sinai. What's going on? Is it working?
Everything's working.
The way your two faces look, it makes me worry.
There's a problem with the electricity over here. I'm just trying to see why it's not set.
There are no other outlets in this whole room? Really?
I'm going to put it directly to this.
Can be these this could be tested beforehand, no?
Everything is working.
Okay.
Just want to make sure it doesn't.
So what we're really dealing with here is not just about language, but I will throw in another word here. What we're really dealing with is courage. You see, it's hard to estimate and quantify in any tangible way the power of the status quo in our comfort zones. That we're comfortable with particular status quo of our situation. When someone has done something again and again and again, many, many times, it becomes a habit. Once it becomes a habit, how much energy do you need to break a habit? So nobody's really created a mathematical equation, but we know for sure from human experience that it's quite complicated. That once you're 40 years old, let's say, 30 years old, and you've been doing something so many times, it's extremely complicated and difficult to change that habit. So when we're using words, and we use them many, many times, the challenge here is not just let's really redefine the word. We've become comfortable with words, just like we've become comfortable with so many routines that we are involved in. Look how hard it is to start a new routine, and yet if you brush your teeth every morning, it comes to you automatically. Why? Because once it's become your habit, it's easy. But imagine someone, you haven't brushed your teeth for 30 years and suddenly someone says, start brushing your teeth. Just using a morbid example, I guess, whatever. Just using a stupid little example like that. The same thing is with language. Even though our minds tell us that we should be challenging the words that we use again and again, but it's not so simple to just change the words that you're so accustomed to. So what really required, and this is, in a way you can say, this is really what it means to be Jewish, is to challenge yourself all the time. Is to challenge your status quo, and it's to challenge your comfort zone, challenge even the words and the meaning behind the words. And as such, when you talk about Judaism, I will define it the way I come to understand it, which doesn't have any Hebrew words. I'm not going to refer to any type of comfortable language that we're accustomed to. And I think maybe the best place to begin with is with God. And what I said earlier, that God, a higher reality, the essence of reality, is actually a very apt description. What does it mean? It means that when you ask yourself the question, what is real? So the first initial knee-jerk reaction most of us would have is what is real is what we experience with our senses. You know, what do we experience with our senses? Number one, we experience with our senses, we see things, we hear things, we taste, touch, and smell things. That's the first step. And someone says, is that all of reality? And of course your next answer is, when you think about it, no. There's a whole dimension of experiences that you cannot experience on a sensory level. For example, thoughts, feelings, love, ideas. These are not experienced. You can't see them, you can't taste, touch, or smell them. So, but nevertheless, you still experience them. And if you ask the question, is that all of reality? You have to come to the next conclusion, no, there's maybe more. Not only maybe more, you definitely sense that there's more. The question is, how deep down the rabbit hole can you go? How far do you go? So in a sense, like through a process of elimination, you come to realize that there's a reality that is far beyond what we perceive with our sensory and supersensory tools. And if you go to the core, if you're able to get to the essence, the core essence of it all, that perhaps is the definition of God. I'm not saying it's the entire definition, but it's a beginning. Now, why is this far more complicated than just saying God is the one that gave us Torah at Sinai and He tells us what He wants and created us? Because this is forcing you to get out of your comfort zone. What's reality? What I came to discover after, I said, research and study, is that the exact trap is trying to find words that quantify. The big challenge, and the mystics talk about this, is actually defining the words. To find words is almost impossible when you're talking about describing real reality, because reality is experience, not words. So if you ask me to translate and define Judaism in one sentence, I would say Judaism is not a religion, it's not a cult, it's not superstition, it's not a history, it's not culture, it's not a set of laws and rituals. It is an experience. That's what it is. It's an experience, which is far different than when you say, for example, something's a philosophy. A philosophy is a set of ideas. It's theories about trying to understand something, which is, there's an element of philosophy in Judaism, but above all, Judaism is a way of life. A way of life is an experience. It's experiencing reality in the deepest possible way. Now, I know this sounds like an odd definition. Who would ever define Judaism that way? That's the experiencing reality in the fullest definition. But if you think about it, and I challenge you to think about it, you'll come to realize it's exactly what the Torah is all about. What happened at Sinai? God established a relationship with the people. What it means, a relationship between a divine God, an immortal God, and mortal creatures. What kind of relationship is possible between them? The only answer is that our so-called superficial or outer reality can have a connection and relate to the deepest reality of the divine. So we're not living in an airtight existence. We're able to have a relationship with something beyond ourselves. And that, in essence, is really the whole point of the entire Torah. So when Hillel was asked this question by the potential convert, Hillel was asked the question, teach me the entire Torah standing on one foot. What did he say? He said, what you dislike, what you hate, you despise, do not do unto others. The rest is commentary. Interestingly, when the convert came to Shammai, who was Hillel's colleague, who was far harsher, he actually rejected him. He said, you can't teach the entire Torah standing on one foot. But Hillel did make this statement. So you see, Hillel did exactly the same thing. Why didn't he just tell him, the whole Torah is a book of laws. It's a book of rituals, it's a book of mitzvahs, whatever you want to call it. No, he made a statement which is disarming by saying, what you dislike, don't do unto others. It's a way of life. It's what you experience. So the idea, the whole model of secular education is all about compartmentalization. You sign up for college or for school, any level school, and they give you a series of different subjects that some are required, some are optional. And they are absolutely distinguished one from the next. The physical sciences and the social sciences and political sciences are three different fields, and each one has completely separate fields. Biology and chemistry are not the same. Philosophy, psychology are not the same. In Judaism, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a curriculum made up of subjects. Yeah, obviously, when you're studying Bible, Chumash, you're not studying Talmud. But there's no fundamental dichotomy, because Judaism is a way of life, and a way of life is not broken into pieces. It's not like, okay, now we're doing philosophy, now we're doing psychology. It's always a way of life. Philosophy is part of the way of life, and psychology is a way of life. Let's take Bertrand Russell versus, you can say, the Rambam, Maimonides. They're not contemporaries of each other, but it's a good contrast. So Bertrand Russell, who is a professor of ethics and a philosopher and many other things, once was asked about behavior something unethical that he did. How you, a professor of ethics, can behave so immorally? And his classic response was, I also teach mathematics and I'm not a triangle. That's what his response was. In other words, I teach it doesn't mean I'm it. Comes Maimonides, a number of years earlier, 1,000 years earlier, and says the following in Hilchos Deis, chapter 5, in his Mishnah Torah, his book of classic, his magnum opus, says, if you want to recognize Chacham, Ezuhu Chacham, who is a wise person, you have to look not at his oratory skills, not at his philosophical perception, not at his brilliance and his scholarship. You have to look at his details. This is what he says: how he eats and how he sleeps, how he walks and how he talks, how he treats others. All comes down to a way of life. Because there's no such thing as separating intelligence and academia from the way you are. Obviously, none of us live up necessarily to our ideals, but that should not be seen as a virtue. We all have flaws. We don't have to make a philosophy out of them. So this dichotomy, this fundamental dichotomy in Judaism does not exist. What is the most famous prayer, the most famous statement, declaration in all of Judaism? Shema. And the last word, echad, unity. Unity means integration, it means fusion, it means there is no compartmentalization, no fragmentation. So the sheer concept of fragmentation is antithetical to all of what Judaism is about. It's about integration. Now, whether we're all integrated or not is another story, but the objective is battling fragmentation and creating cohesiveness and harmony. The entire Torah at Sinai, what was it given? To create peace in this world. So if you want to understand Torah, understand its impact. Torah is a force of a unifying force. It's a way of life. And this is foreign to many of us because we have never taught about things in that context. We're taught, okay, you can learn a little philosophy, a little mathematics, a little science, literature, history, and hopefully it will give you a rounded knowledge that you can make yourself a living, a career, but a way of life. That's something you have to figure out on your own. As a matter of fact, many schools pride themselves as being amoral, meaning neutral when it comes to morality. Science will say it's amoral. We're not telling you what's right or wrong. We're just telling you the facts or the theories as we understand them. So all this is the opposite of what the Torah is. The Torah is about a way of life, and therefore it's all of the above: philosophy and psychology and culture and rituals. But it's not a sum of the parts. It's something completely different. It's really the search for a deeper reality and making that reality part of our reality. That's what it comes down to. And as such, if you think of Judaism like that, then you could ask the question, is this relegated only to Jews? What I just said is pretty universal. And the answer is absolutely universal. That's why Sinai, as I mentioned, caused the entire world to tremble. And that's why it did capture the imagination, and you have, as I said, 60% of the earth. Its population in some way identifies with it. Whether they identify with this idea or not, doesn't matter what they consciously are aware of. But there's the truths that were revealed at Sinai and that happened at Sinai that resonated and became a force in nature and a force in history. The sad part is that most of religion today has been relegated to anything but a way of life in this sense. Yes, of course, it's a way of life in the sense that people get up in the morning and they pray and they go through a set of rituals. When I say a way of life, I don't mean rituals and routines. I mean a way of life means a way of experiencing life in a deeper form. Today, religion, you can be very comfortable and stay in your comfort zone, be a very religious, comfortable person without challenging yourself at all. That's why it's so disturbing, and so many people are disturbed by the fact that you can see someone that seems to dress or claim to be more holier than thou, and their behavior is anything but refined. So what's bothering us? You expect, be more refined. Why is that not just a given, that a person who's more committed to God should be more refined? Why is that not a given? Because unfortunately, religion, as I said, we get stuck in our comfort zone. It has nothing to do with what Judaism really is. It's to do with what people's habits are. You could teach a monkey also to go through a whole series of rituals. That doesn't make the monkey a religious monkey. Maybe in today's standards. So the point is that if Judaism is anything, it's challenging yourself and never being comfortable with whatever routine you're involved in. And it's always about seeking something greater. What else is a relationship with God if not that? If God becomes your comfort zone, then it defeats the whole purpose. Why is idol worship one of the greatest sins? Take the second commandment in the 10 Commandments that we read this week's chapter. And then says, do not have false gods. False gods, idol worship, as we know, is one of the gravest sins. It's one of the 3 sins that one person has to die before they commit. And it's equated with murder and incest. Can you imagine? It's a pretty severe. You could think, what's the big thing? Idol worship. People want to be stupid and they want to worship stones and trees and the sun and the moon. Okay. Is God that insecure that he really is jealous of people choosing stone over him? What exactly is this thing with idol worship? Why is it such a big problem? And we say it's one of the core foundations of Jewish thought. Right after, I am your God who took you out of Egypt, comes the do not have false gods. You ever think about this? The answer is, if you think a very simple answer, and go beyond the ritual, you'll understand it immediately. Think out of the box a moment. Very simple, because what is idol worship? Idol worship is replacing God, basically. You want a God on your terms. I could see a stone, I can't see God. The whole purpose of God is that you should go out of yourself and experience something beyond yourself. If you're going to start making a God in your image, it defeats the whole purpose of God creating the human being in God's image. It comes down, who are you worshiping? Yourself or something greater than yourself? Idol worship lies at the heart of all problems because it's worshiping yourself and your perception. You want a God that works for you, which is the basis of really what idol worship is. Really an extension of self-worship. Everybody's worshiping something. The question is what you're worshiping, either yourself or something beyond yourself. Some of us worship other people, worship money. We worship all kinds of other icons. The whole meaning of God means it's not about you. It's not about your perception. It's about experiencing something beyond yourself. That was what Abraham went to seek. He went to look for something beyond myself. If you want an extension of yourself, then you don't need God. Then just call it yourself and call it the extension of self-worship. When religion becomes an end in itself and loses its connection to God, it's just another form of idol worship. That's what it could be. So rituals alone can be called religious addiction. That itself can be idol worship. I know that's a strong statement. I don't know if it's halachically or legally idol worship, but it's definitely self-worship. It's worshiping your rituals. So the intolerance of someone else because you're so religious, is it intolerance because you're representing God, or is it intolerance because you think that you're right? Why is that intolerance not just another form of arrogance? Just because it's dressed up in religious garb, it's all about you. The beauty of Judaism was that it was never about the person. It was always understanding that there's something greater than you are. Even the great Moses, when he asked God, show me your face, God says, you cannot see my face and live. God remains elusive, because as long as if it becomes part of your extension of your comfort zone, it defeats the entire purpose. So what I'm saying is absolutely, I'm not couching it, but it's actually probably going to disturb many people who consider themselves very frum, so to speak. But basically, one could be religious and ritual and do every ritual and have no God. And the best proof of no God is they're not able to get out of their comfort zone. So then one could argue that the religions is just another addiction. Like everybody's got their addictions. What's an addiction? Addiction is that the object is mastering you instead of you mastering it. The whole point of godliness is to experience something that's not about yourself. It's the tool, is the ability for us to be able to get beyond ourselves. One of the key foundations of any real healing is no matter what happened to you in your life, there's always a deeper dimension of your soul that you can access. Someone will say, listen, it's too late for me. I'm damaged goods. I was hurt. I was wounded. Just think of it, let's say, in physical terms. A person was in an accident, and a part of them was wounded. That's it. Some things don't regenerate. And that's it. I have no choice just to know that I'm now handicapped and limited. What's our response to that? That's not true, because the soul has infinite dimensions to it, and even if the outer layers may have been wounded and hurt, there are always dimensions that were never touched. Why? Because God is an endless journey. Don't think your perception of yourself should define you. So it's true, many of us have been hurt deeply. We're not denying that, and we have to be sensitive. But the beauty of real growth, or we could say of real godliness, is that there's always hope, because there's deeper reservoirs, there's deeper resources you can access. So really, faith in God is really simply saying one thing, that as much as I have it figured out, there's something more I don't see. Acknowledging that is actually our greatest redemption, because it means that you're not going to be trapped in your own limited perception of yourself and your flaws and your insecurities and so on, and fears. The greatest fighter against fear and insecurity is God, is recognizing that your soul is a part of God, and that soul has an infinite amount of resources far beyond your perception. So when a mother tells a doctor that the doctor tells a mother of an autistic child, and we have stories like this, take your child and send him away because you will never have a relationship with him. And the mother insists and says, my child, I will not send my child away, I will create a relationship. And the doctor says, it's impossible. And then years pass, and the mother creates a relationship, and there's documented stories like this. Not that the child ceased to be autistic, and the doctor will acknowledge something here that I can't explain, is because when someone has that type of belief in the human spirit, you reach places that are initially unfathomable and almost impossible to imagine. This is the essence of faith in God and how it works. And when a person is able to connect to that, that's what real Judaism is about. Is the ability to go beyond the mortal and connect to the immortal, to the eternal, and make it part of your life. And that was the real achievement of Sinai. The rest is commentary. The laws, the mitzvahs, the details, These are already all an outgrowth of this, we'll call it unprecedented experience. They experienced truth, a moment of truth. You ever experienced a moment of truth, a magical moment? That was Sinai. It was on this earth an experience of something that was completely beyond. And as I said, it changed history. So, going back to the 200th year of the Alter Rebbe's yahrzeit, as I mentioned, when he talks about Torah and he talks about mitzvahs, you'll see it's all permeated with this essential message. We're not talking here about a book. We're talking about a blueprint for life. So, for example, if you come home with a computer with a new machine, and the computer comes with an operator's manual. Actually, Steve Jobs insisted that no Apple machine should have operator's manuals. But fine. But most do have an operator's manual. The Torah is the life operator manual given to us by the cosmic engineer that engineered and created the human being. So you think of Torah that way, it's a whole different story than just a Torah of laws or a Torah of stories. It's a Torah of life. Understanding and getting an X-ray of your own soul, a CAT scan of God's mind. I would think that's pretty intriguing. To get an X-ray of your own soul, something you can't really see in the mirror, you can't really come to perceive on your own. And when you're reading the Torah, you start realizing truths that resonate within us because they have that type of wisdom, the wisdom of life, the wisdom of the psyche, of the dynamics of how we function. That is what allows us and empowers us to achieve real freedom. Now the Mishnah says, "Ein lecha ben chayrin." There's no one that's free except ela misha esek b'Torah, except someone that studies Torah. It's an interesting statement. It's also interesting. It doesn't say that kol misha esek b'Torah, that everyone that studies Torah is free. It just says you can't be free without Torah. That's also quite emphasis. What does that mean? Because there's an expression in the Talmud. It's called "ein chavish mater esatzmei." Someone that's chavish is imprisoned, someone that's bound and fettered, cannot free himself. When you're in a pit, in a deep pit, you can't climb out yourself without someone throwing you a rope. Psychologically, even more so. When you're subjective about yourself, you can't free yourself. So there's an expression, you can't free yourself. Einstein, actually, I don't know if he got it from the Talmud, but definitely his genes probably got it from there. Put it this way, he says, you cannot change a system from within a system. If you want to change a system, you have to think outside of the system, because anything from within the system is being dictated by the system. How could it change it? Something can't change itself. So whenever you want to really find freedom, you have to be able to go outside of the system. Any wisdom or any school of thought that's a product of human research or of the human pursuit of knowledge, of truth, is a product of the human being and therefore subject to our own subjectivity. Torah, considered to be the CAT scan of God's mind, the blueprint, the operator's manual, is giving you a picture of yourself that is not coming from yourself. And as such, it has the ability to bring freedom. Freedom means the ability to free yourself from your own subjective perceptions. It's like having a good friend that challenges you, that you trust, but challenges you and challenges your conclusions. Because we all make conclusions often that are very subjective and determined by biases and personal interests. We don't necessarily want to hear a contrary opinion. So the Torah is an excellent challenger because it gives you a different perspective. Your perspective is this, let me present to you a different way of looking at it. Which again is in a way how God interacts with us. The greatest dialogue between human being and God is you make one statement, God makes an opposite statement, and you start the argument. Look at the greatest men and women of faith argue with God all the time. Abraham, Moses, they challenge God, how could a good God allow for pain in this world? Because it's all about getting out of the comfort zone, getting out of our comfortable perceptions and being challenged to perceive it in a different fashion. So why doesn't it say that anyone who studies Torah is free? Because unfortunately you can study Torah, as I said before, and it also should be just a part of your own academic or your own culture and just part of your habits. It doesn't cause you to be free. You can go through the motions and not achieve the emancipation that it's meant to achieve. Like I said with Hillel, it's about loving another person. The Talmud says that someone who studies the Torah and doesn't make a blessing before will ultimately forsake the Torah. If he doesn't acknowledge there's a God, Torah can also become rendered, unfortunately, into an academic book, like with Bertrand Russell, where it doesn't affect you. You read it, you know all the laws, but you're not a triangle. The element that allows a person to really achieve an integration that fights the dichotomy that I just described, is recognizing there's a God that gave the Torah. It's not just there's a Torah. There's a statement when the Jews came out of Egypt, before they received the Torah, so they said to God, so now that you've freed us, why don't you give us your mitzvahs, your laws? And God's response was, no, first kablu malchusei, first accept my sovereignty, my authority, and then kablu gzereisei, then you'll accept my decrees, my mitzvahs. What was God saying? An unbelievable, simple statement, but it's the foundation of all relationships. When two people love each other, so clearly they will do things for each other, even if it's inconvenient. But is their commitment based on the list of things you ask them to do, like a list of a to-do list? Or is the relationship itself the basis of their connection, and then automatically, whatever comes your way, whether it's comfortable or not comfortable, you do? God was saying, I don't want a relationship with you based on a to-do list of 613 tasks. I want you to accept me, accept an authority that's greater than yourself. Then I know that the things I ask you to do will automatically come. When a relationship is lacking that foundational element and it's based on details, then it's a contract, a business contract. The details work great, and if they don't work, you're out of it. Commitment on the level that God was requesting was, I want a commitment to me. I want you to accept me, my entirety. And then I'm ready to tell you the things I'd like you to do. And of course, the opposite is also true. God accepts the human being as an entirety because He actually created them, created us with all our pros and cons, with all our strengths and weaknesses. So when we speak about... is it hot in here? Right? Yeah. So when we speak about what is the Torah, it ultimately is the secret of all relationships, which is a way of life. It's experience. When two people experience something, they don't need necessarily so much rationale. I always say this when I tell, can you give me a tissue or something like that? Is there a way to cool this place up? Huh?
Yeah, it's very hot.
Hmm? When you often people come speak to me and consult about public speaking, communication. So I always ask somebody who's a communicator or wants to be a communicator, I said, so if you have an audience, you see them for the first time, you may never see them again. What's your goal? What would be your goal? And people come up with different answers. My goal is to inspire them. My goal is to leave them with something. My goal is them to come back. And all kinds of different goals that we have. But everyone's always lacking. See, those goals that I just described are all results. You want results. The result, you want them to return. You want them. But what is it that you want to achieve in your connection with them? And the answer is one word: trust. You want to achieve trust. If you don't achieve trust, you can be as brilliant as you may be, but there's no connection. Thank you. Like they say, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So you could be brilliant in knowledge, and people will hear you. And listen, if it's real estate tips or tips how to make money on the internet, they may listen to you, but they may not trust you. They'll just take your tips and leave. But when there's trust, you'll get the benefit of the doubt, and you don't need to explain everything. What is trust? Trust is a bond. It's a connection. It's a connection that you relate to. It resonates. It resonates because you feel that this person that's speaking to you understands me, and we both experience similar things. That type of connection cannot be purchased. That can only come from a real connection. You can't fake that. Yes, there are people who are emotionally manipulative. You could fake a little. But ultimately, trust is something, because trust is something that you must earn. I find that, and this for me was a personal experience, I was looking to trust Judaism. I wasn't looking to understand it. I had studied in yeshiva, and I was sometimes a great student, sometimes not a great student. I won't go through all the details. I was a troublemaker. But I was not looking to understand the Judaism. Understand there's a lot of things. You can understand physics. I like physics and math and many other schools of thought. I was looking to trust something that I can commit my life to and be passionate about. That's far more than just understanding it. You can understand 2 + 2 is 4. It doesn't mean you're going to be passionate about it. Even though there are passionate mathematicians, and I'm not taking away from them. I was looking for a way of life, something that resonated. And to me, that was the real search. It wasn't about, I'm going to I'll do a few more rituals and a few more commitments, and then I'm in the club, and I'll be accepted, and I'll get extra points. Maybe when you're a child, that's what you do it for. That's how you function. At some point, you're looking for something that is real. Yeah, that's the word, real. How would you define this word, real? Not easy to define. Real is, I would say, best way to define it is by what it's not. It's not everything else we know in life, which isn't real. What isn't real, we see all the time. We see superficial, artificial things. We see how people are fickle. They can be loyal one moment and they're gone. There's plenty of examples of things that aren't real. So to look for something that's real is basically looking for something that is rare. And it's not everything else we experience, not common experiences. To find unreal things doesn't take much. What you got to do is you stick your fork in any experience and you'll have 1,000 unreal ones. But to find that one real experience is a whole different story. But it requires courage and commitment, because it's so much easier to just resign yourself into saying, you know what, the more things change, the more they stay the same. We're not really going anywhere. People are all for sale. So the bottom line is that, and I speak again personally, for me I was looking for the reality of it, the trust of it. And it was when I started realizing certain ideas that resonated, and I realized the person who wrote this or said this is like a person I want to be a friend with. That's when everything changed. There's an expression in the Torah, very interesting, that Moses was the only man that spoke to God face to face. And there's an expression as a friend that spoke to a friend. That uses an expression, like you speak to a friend. The Torah uses that word. So when I read that in the Torah, I said, wow, that's what you want. That's what I want. I want to have a friend like that. You can speak to God like a friend. That's something. I can't tell you if I've achieved it. I'm not Moses. But I see that there was an aspiration like that. So there are key words that you find when you start to struggle. You start looking, wow, that's a word that speaks to me. And trust is the key to real relationships. So when God said to the Jews, I'm not going to tell you what I want of you. I'm not going to give you a list. You'll do it. You may do it, not do it. I want you to accept me. I want to trust with you. I want to have a trusting relationship, because then I know no matter what happens, thick or thin, through thick or thin, we will make it. The interesting twist is that some of the great tzaddikim over the generations who saw how horribly Jews suffered would invoke this statement. There's a medrash that says that God is compared to the one that forsake the Jewish people when the destruction of the temple came, not the other way around. And it says when Mashiach will come, the wife, meaning the aguna, the woman that was left alone, in this case the Jewish people after the destruction, God will be shocked to see that they still waited thousands of years for God to return. And tzaddikim would invoke this all the time, because where's the trust? We trusted you. Where'd you go? Jews even in the Holocaust made statements like that. They said, we're not going to give up our trust in God just because God forsaked us. That's a pretty powerful statement, because that's real commitment. Real commitment means when you love somebody, even if they betrayed you, you don't stop loving them. That takes a lot of strength. We're not talking about now a codependent or someone that does it for dysfunctional reasons. We're talking about someone who has the strength to do that. That just because You don't, just because you stop loving me or you express just ways you don't love, if it's a healthy love, I still love you. This is where trust is established. And that is also a critical element in defining Judaism, Torah, Sinai, and so on. So I know this may be, for some of you, maybe not, a maybe different take on the whole definition of Judaism. It's definitely a universal one. So you may wonder, so then why isn't everybody, why is there such a thing as Jews and non-Jews? Everything I described seems to be very universal, very global, not non-parochial, non-denominational, non-sectarian. It's non-profit, but it's non-sectarian. So why is there a distinction? It's a good question, and I will just respond briefly. Because God did create a diverse universe. Even though there are global truths and there are universal messages that we all relate to, and we can all relate, and we all can understand, the search for God, the search for reality, trust. These are all fundamental principles. In the basic foundations of life, love, pain, we're all equal. Yet at the same time, God did create a structure. He created male and female. He created among men differences, among women differences, and He created nations. And the diversity is part of the beauty of it. We're not clones of each other. And Jews do have a particular role, and non-Jews have their own particular role. They have many overlapping roles. But there's nothing wrong to have diversity. So though there are universal messages of the Torah, especially the ones I just described, the search for God, the search for a life of harmony, search for unity, yet there's how each of us expresses is very different. Some of us are more cerebral, others are more emotional. We have different ways of experiencing this type of unity. So the same is true among nations, and the same thing with Jews and non-Jews. Each has their particular role. Obviously this requires more discussion. What are the roles and what's the distinction? But that's out of the scope of this tonight's class. We'll talk about that another time. But suffice it to say that when we strip Judaism, the Torah, from the words, and you get into the essence of it, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the resonating search for something greater than yourself and making it part of who you are. That's what it comes down to. And the mitzvahs, which mean connections, are exactly that. What are they connecting you to? They're connecting you to a higher reality. So I would conclude on a practical note that my real objective with all the words that I've shared here this evening is really to hopefully challenge myself and challenge you and help you challenge yourself in our comfort zones. Growth in every possible way, whether you want to get out of a troublesome situation or you want to get into a better situation, even if you're in a good one, always requires a measure of courage and a measure of taking a leap. And the first place to challenge yourself is your perception of yourself and of things around you. Because that is where most of us are trapped. People wake up in the morning. What do? You go to work, most of us. We have our routines. Everyone's got their routines. We are creatures of habit. And that habit is really what controls our lives. We're not really in control of what we're doing. Even though we live in a democracy and freedom, and yes, we have smartphones, and you could press any button and get anything. It's an illusion of control. It's not real control. Control is whether you have control over yourself and your own routines. Can you actually challenge yourself and say, you know what? I'm going to change my routine from here on. Try to do that. It says in the Mishnah, it says, also disarming different way of expressing. Who's a wise person? So usually you think a wise person is a person with intelligence. So as a wise person, Ezu Chacham, who's a wise person? Alemed B'Kol Adam. One who learns something from everybody. Who is a gibber? Who is a powerful person? It's an interesting response. Hakevish Esitzrei, the one who's able to control his own temptations. Usually power is someone who controls others, who controls a government, who controls a domain. Controlling yourself, that's real power. Every expression in this context is all about, real freedom is about how you look at yourself. And unfortunately, prosperity, comfort, When things are going well, that's sometimes the biggest trap of all, because you say to yourself, what do I have to change? Everything is going well. That's where the real Jew comes out. The real Jews are the ones that challenge themselves even when they're comfortable. You know the story with Rabbi Zera. I've told the story several times here in the Talmud. So Rabbi Zera was a great sage of the Babylonian academies. You know, in those times when the Talmud was developed, around basically in the first centuries, first and second century. So there were two academies. One was called the Babylonian Academy, and hence the Talmud Bavli, Babylonian Talmud. That was in Bavel, which is modern day Iraq, and that was after the first temple was destroyed. So the Jews settled in Babylon, and that's where they established yeshivas, the Babylonian Talmud. But then there was another academy, a smaller one in Jerusalem. It's called Talmud Yerushalmi. So it's similar tractates, but it's far shorter and briefer, and a different style than the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud is much more extensive and considered more reliable because it came afterwards. So it was like had arguments that were more conclusive than the Talmud Yerushalmi. So the Talmud tells this fascinating story. Rabbi Zera was a great scholar in the Babylonian academies, and then he decided he wants to move to Jerusalem. He wants to study the method of the Jerusalem Talmud. So what does it say? He fasted 100 fasts in order to forget the Babylonian Talmud to study the Jerusalem Talmud. So it's a very strange story. Since when do you have to forget knowledge to accumulate knowledge? Knowledge is accumulative. You want to grow? Okay, learn new things. Forget what you learned yesterday in order to gain something tomorrow. Where do you have such precedent for such a type of growth? Secondly, from a halachic point of view, it says it's forbidden for somebody to deliberately forget something that in Torah. Torah is God's wisdom. You cannot, if you forget it not due to your fault, it's one thing. But what right do you have to go deliberately forget? And the answer given is a very brilliant and simple but profound answer. And that answer is, Rabbi Zera was not looking to forget what he had learned. He was looking to forget the methodology of the Babylonian methodology. Its method was far different. The Babylonian method was much more through arguments, through counter-arguments, through questions, through probing. It's a very challenging type of dialogue when you read the Babylonian Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud has far less dialogue. It's more like clarity. The teachers in the Jerusalem Talmud just tell you the way it is. So it's a method of like achieving crystallized clarity as fast as possible. The Babylonian is mechshakim shivani, that we go through arguments and counter-arguments and doubts and confusion, and from that you come to a deeper clarity. It's a different type of method. Now, what motivated this man Rabbi Zera, who must have been in his 40s or maybe later, mastered the Talmud? Why would he suddenly want to grow like that? He's a master. It wasn't because something wasn't working. This is a sign of a man of truth. People of truth look for truth not because they're gaining something out of it, and not because something's wrong with what was yesterday. It's not breaking a bad habit. It's because they're looking to grow and looking to get out of their comfort zone. And for that he had to fast. He wasn't fasting to forget the knowledge, which is forbidden. He was fasting to forget the methodology. Now, you don't find many people like this. You can't even find people who are ready to break bad habits. But to break a good habit requires a certain type of state of mind of a person who's seeking the truth. So Avraham Avinu, the first commandment to the first Jew is Lech lecha ma'artzecha, leave your homeland, leave your comfort zone. It's the key to all growth. So if you want to know what the Torah is, it's Lech lecha, in one word. The entire Torah is getting out of yourself. And that's why when a person is so obsessed with, let's say, a mitzvah, and they are to the point that they're not tolerant of anyone else, that's as anti-God as possible. What does that mean? How could you be intolerant? It's all about you. It's about your own selfishness. Now, there's nothing wrong. A person wants to be devout, let them be devout. But if it's at the expense of others, or it's because you need to be wrong because I'm right, then you're just getting into just another hierarchy, another bureaucracy of elitism, of people who are insecure, trying to demonstrate that they're always right, instead of a path of truth, looking to find what is greater. That is why real godly people are always more refined. Their mitzvahs and their commitments are all about, not about themselves, but about a higher cause. And it's never about creating another ghetto and creating another clique, another, call it inbreeding, recycled experience where people just pat each other on the back and saying, oh, we're all right and we're all in the good club and everybody out there is in the wrong club. That's the classic symptom of, number one, insecurity, classic symptom of people who are who find growth dangerous, the classic symptom of people who do not have the confidence of experiencing God. Because to experience God is not about a comfort zone. I remember I was once interviewed in a radio show, and the woman thought she was like going to ridicule me, basically. So she says to me, so tell me, Rabbi, do you ever have a crisis of faith? That was the way she posed it on this live show. So I said, yes, absolutely, every second of my life. And she asked me, what do you mean? So I said, let me ask you, you probably think that faith is people of faith, it's like a crutch. It's easier to have faith than no faith, right? Because, yes, she says exactly, because people of faith, every time a problem happens, all they say is God, they turn to God. Where people of no faith have to really deal with the issues. They have no crutch, they have no one to blame, no scapegoat. So I said, well, what you're describing is a very immature dimension of faith or lack of faith. My definition of faith is as follows, is that a person who really believes in a good God and therefore justice struggles every second with a big paradox and dilemma. How does a good God allow for suffering in this world? And let me ask you, if you don't have a God, why does that bother you altogether? When you see an innocent child suffering, when you see injustices, why are you bothered? Who says there's justice in the world? Dog eats dog, survival of the fittest. Just like in the wild, the powerful hunters will kill the weak prey. That's just the way it is. What's bothering you exactly? Why should faith should be very easy. You have you have no standard. And I, of course, let her have it the way I wanted to let her have it. And I said, so frankly, faith is far more courageous choice, because you have to deal with a paradox. You have to deal with a standard that's very, very high, and yet you see all the time that it's being compromised. And you have to struggle with that question. Whereas if you don't have that high God standard, then there's no struggle altogether. Anyway, she didn't have much to say, so I'm not going to get into what her response was. It was not her role actually to judge. But I want to, in these situations, what you want to do is get your message across. It had nothing to do with her. It was obviously the audience I was trying to talk to. The point I'm trying to make is that it's a whole different take on Judaism, on Torah, religion, as opposed to being a crutch, as opposed to being another symptom and manifestation of human weakness. It really is about being the most courageous. Real people of God, of faith, are people who have the most strength and courage. Not because they're blaming God, on the contrary, because their standards are high. They want the most. They want heaven and beyond. And they want it here on earth. And they're ready to fight for it. And even when it doesn't work, they don't give up. These are people, this is what faith is about. This is what Judaism is really. It's a war, and it's unbelievable a reservoir of hope that nothing is impossible. Now, tell me, is that not a system you want to embrace? That nothing is impossible. No matter what happens in a person's life, no matter what comes your way, you can achieve anything you wish to achieve because you believe and you connect and you trust that there are deeper forces at work, mysterious ones, and you have the ability to access them. And you never give up just because everyone says, hey, it's not going to work. That's not how it works. We live in a world where things are defined from the outside in. if everybody's doing it, it seems like the right thing to do. The few people that are the true called innovators are people who work from the inside out. They have a gut feeling and they just go for it, even if everyone says no, and they just do it. That's a pioneer. That takes strength. That, to me, is the ultimate act of faith. Now, it's not faith in the religious sense of the word. It's not faith, we believe in something. No, it's a deep-rooted conviction in things that are beyond man-made institutions. That is the essence of what God is about. That's the essence of what Torah is about. And that's what happened at Sinai. What Sinai happened was heaven met earth, heaven kissed earth, where the two worlds, the finite and the infinite, met and forever changed the universe. So it was no accident that suddenly these ideas 1,000 years later became rampant and gave birth to Christianity, and then another 600 years later gave birth to Islam. And again, without going into all the comparisons, but certain basic truths, there is ebes me'eretz titzmach. The truth emerges after a while. Now it's interesting, the Talmud says, in referring to this story in this week's chapter, that before Sinai, God went to the children of Ishmael, which would later become the Arabs and the Muslims, and to the children of Esau, which would become the Christian, Roman, Western world, and offered them the Torah. And they rejected it on the ground, saying, it's not for us. They looked inside, they said, don't murder, I can't handle that. Don't have immoral sexual relations, I can't handle that. And it was the Jews that did accept the Torah. So the question is asked, why would God show it and offer it to other nations when He knew they're not going to accept it? And let's put it this way, let's say they did accept it. What would happen with the Jews? After all this, 210 years of Egypt, and then suddenly you decided to give it to someone else? So the answer the Zohar says is because God, even though they rejected, God knew that ultimately they will embrace it. They weren't ready then. So the offer was essentially paving the way that one day they will embrace it. So when we talk about the world of Mashiach, the future, we're talking about a world, not just Jews, an entire world that will embrace the divine knowledge. As Maimonides concludes his classic work, he says, will be a time, there'll be no famine and no war and no jealousy and no illness. And he says, it will be a time where the sole preoccupation of the entire world, all the nations, will be to know God. And he cites the classic verse, it will be a world that's filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. So all nations of the world will recognize a higher force. Recognize that what we see in the world around us is just the glove, and they'll recognize the hand inside the glove. And of course the hand connects to a whole entity. So it's not just that there's an artist that painted this beautiful painting called life, called existence, but the artist has many, many other potential pieces of art that we have not yet experienced. And the artist is also beyond being an artist. This is ultimately the journey into the mysteries of the divine. So, hopefully this maybe challenges us all to have a new take on what we call Judaism, Torah, God, mitzvahs, and so on. And maybe we can all become a little more real. Instead of doing things just by mechanical rote, the way we just did it yesterday and the day before, to actually own our decisions and think of them in terms of real courage, a real courageous move, to look at it as something that you're taking a bold move, not just something that you do out of habit or out of imposition, but something you choose, which is the ultimate experience of freedom. And I want to say also one more thing, that when God gave the Torah, it says, He told Moses to first speak to the women and then to the men. And the reason given for this is, one of the reasons, is because in the beginning of the story of Genesis, when Adam and Eve were in the garden, God spoke first to the man and then to the woman, and it didn't work out so well. And it was Adam that told Eve that God said, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. Had Eve heard directly from God, we wouldn't have had all the problems that came around. So God said this time around, speak to the women first. So there's much that can be said about the mystique, feminine mystique. Long before Betty Friedan wrote her book in the 60s. And it begins in this chapter and many others that talk about the power of the subtlety of feminine energy. And that sometimes what I discussed last week at length. The title was "Are Women Superior?" That there is, you could say, there's people who experience love, men experience love, and women are love. There's a noun and there's a verb. There's a state of being, and then there's experiencing something. And ultimately, the state of being is where you are the carrier of life. Adam is called Adama, Adam from the word earth, dust. And Chava is called the mother of life. When a woman is able to carry life, it's not just an incidental thing, it's because her feminine personality is made of life. Whereas a man has to be taught these ideas. But as I explained last week, it's not mutually exclusive. Masculine energy has within it feminine energy, and feminine energy has within it masculine energy. But it's not a surprise that as we prepare for the story of Sinai, which is about connecting to something that's beyond us, then sometimes women have a touch and intuition about that more than men do. That the joke where the woman asks the man, "So what do you think about women's intuition?" He says, "That's baloney." So she said, "How did I know you're going to say that?" So, on the concluding note, it's also personally relevant because this Shabbos is the 22nd of Shvat, is the 25th yahrzeit of the Rebbetzin, Chaya Mushka, who was the wife of the Rebbe, was my teacher and master. And I wanted to mention that as well in the context of this week's chapter, a continuation of the discussion last week. So whether we're men or women or man, each of us are charged with a mission, and it's a measure of with pleasure and pride that we should realize that the fact that we're here on this earth means that we were chosen to be here because we have something indispensable to contribute, and every second that we're kept alive means that you have another second to fulfill this unique mission. And that to me is the essential glorious journey, what it means to be Jewish. And not only for yourself, but it's carrying this message to everyone we meet, and sharing that blessing to everyone, that every person you meet is exactly that, an indispensable musical note that has something unique to contribute. That to me is worthy of celebration. So though Sinai happened so many years ago, it is a reoccurring, a perpetual experience that takes place every second anew, because it renews that contract, what life is all about. The value, the majesty of our journey, the majesty of its uniqueness, and that nothing in this world can stop us if we set our mind to it. And the key is to free ourselves from our fears and from our trappings, all the forces, our own voices, the voices around us that are constantly reminding us that it's not possible, and this is not possible, that's not possible, which is all part of the trap of human habit and human culture and human institutions. God, however, is not bound by the human. So to create a God in the human image is obviously destroying the whole meaning of God. God is telling us, I am the one that took you out of Egypt. I am the one that has the power to take you out of any of your Misarim, Mitzrayim, limitations and confinements. And if you connect to me, if you connect to this higher reality, you will also have that ability to do so. So may we all be blessed this week and forever to get a taste at least and achieve some of this in our lives and discover what that mission is, and not be distracted by all the seductive powers that continuously tug at us every second, more powerful than we may even imagine to be. And I bless you all, and I bless myself and all of us to be able to maintain that and grow day to day, week to week, and month to month, year to year. Well, thank you very much. And I want to say that this week's class is dedicated to the Rebbetzin, Chaim Mushka. And Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night. We will continue our journey, which is now in its third decade. That feels good. In an unbroken chain. And Velvel here is here ready to help anybody that I am not ready to or unable to. And we're here at the Meaningful Life Center in every possible way to participate, partners in this, as I said, majestic life journey. And everyone should have a beautiful week, and until next week, thank you.